The shutdown means no trip to the Philippines for Barack Obama. Well, the Philippines' own finance minister gives me his take on the international impact of America's crisis.
Well, coming up next, the U.S. president is forced to cancel a trip to one of the world's fastest growing economies. Up next, we'll tell you why the Philippines was on his list in the first place.
Hello and welcome back. You're watching World Business Today. The US government shutdown is forcing the President Barack Obama to cut short an upcoming trip to Asia. He's cancelled visits to the Philippines and Malaysia and is instead sending his Secretary of State John Kerry. For now, Mr. Obama is still scheduled to visit Indonesia and Brunei next week for two major regional summits. But cancelling the two other visits is hurting one of his top foreign policy goals. Mr. Obama wants to strengthen ties with Asian economies and try and offset China's growing influence in this region. Take the Philippines, for example. US trade figures from 2011 show that two-way trade between these countries totaled some $22 billion. Now compare that to China. Well, state media there says that trade between China and the Philippines totaled $30 billion that same year.
Well, both countries want to tap into the potential there. The Philippines grew 6.8% last year, making it one of the fastest growing economies in Asia. And fast growth is one of the reasons that Moody's just upgraded the Philippines credit rating by one notch to Baa3 with a positive outlook. And helping to power that growth are remittances. That's the money overseas Filipino workers send back home. The Philippines Central Bank says those workers pumped almost $21.5 billion into the country's banks last year. That's equal to 8.5% of the entire economy. And Nina, as you know, there's a huge Filipino population here in Hong Kong. Many of them have lived here for years and only go back home maybe once every 2 years because they need to work and send that money back to their relatives.
And as such, the value of that money is so important for this country and also for their relatives too. Well, Pauline, those remittances are paid in US dollars, which means that the threat of a US default and its impact on the dollar is an important consideration here. I spoke to the Philippines finance minister and asked him whether he's worried about that and the effect that all of this would have on his economy at home.
Well, the US is the global reserve currency, and I think the U.S. Political leaders know that the U.S. benefits a lot from it, and they won't bring it to a point where people will revisit the U.S. role as the U.S. dollar role as reserve currency. So I believe that they will ultimately resolve that issue and not bring it to a point where people will lose confidence about the dollar. But the good thing about the Philippines is we're a structural current account surplus country on the back of remittances and our BPO industry. And now with tourism helping in, that will even make us stronger, so we can continue to fund consumption and investments in our infrastructure, which assures us that we can continue growing the country at the rate we're growing right now.
And part of that involves your technology sector, your nascent tech boom, which seems to be happening, particularly in the semiconductor space and elsewhere. How important is that to your future goals?
We're trying to sell more and attract more investments from Europe. As you know, the Eurozone is the world's largest economic zone. But when you look at it from our trade statistics, they're not number one. They're, I think, number 4 and number 5. So Europe, even though they're having difficulties, an opportunity for us. Africa is another area. So the key is, one, diversify geographically, diversify the export products. One of the fastest growing exports of the Philippines is ships. We're now the 4th largest shipbuilding country of the world. We have industrial process outsourcing that is producing in the Philippines the modules of factories to be built abroad.
You've said before that investment in infrastructure, reliable energy and infrastructure platform is what's needed to try and attract foreign direct investment. The other thing companies will mention when it comes to the Philippines is its record on corruption. What are you doing to stamp out corruption? Because this has been a long-running problem for decades for the Philippines.
That's exactly the agenda of President Aquino when he ran for office, good governance. His motto is good governance is good economics. In the 3 years that he's been in office, we've reduced corruption dramatically. Well, it's anecdotal at this point. We need to do a formal study. But when you look at the World Economic Forum rating, we started out at 85, now we're at 59. I think there's no other country with a 26-notch improvement in 3 years. A big component of that is improvement in the governance and macroeconomic environment of the country. The people, if you look at social media in the Philippines, are very aware of the fact that corruption is bad for us. And the important thing is you solve it by filing cases, improving institutions, creating a meritocracy. Ultimately, creating a meritocracy will be the solution.
And to create a meritocracy, what you need is economic empowerment, don't you? A lot of people from the Philippines move abroad to work abroad, and so much of the money that comes back into the Philippines is in the form of remittances. What's the outlook like for remittances?
The good thing about our overseas Filipino workers are they're actually spread out all over the world. We do have about 3 million in the Middle East. They remitted, all in all, the 10 million remitted over $23 billion last year, and they've shown the resiliency even through the global economic crisis in 2008. The numbers actually held. And I think what's important to note with our overseas Filipino workers is they're not a static group. Some do come back to the Philippines, and that has resulted to us being now number 4 in shipbuilding in the world because of the wealth of welding skills that are now available in the Philippines from experience in the Middle East. We're working on our macroeconomic fundamentals, on our fiscal issue, on our external position, on making it easier to do business in the Philippines, on empowering our people. For example, our education budget has been increased 50% since President Aquino came in. Our healthcare budget, 77%. Our program of supporting the poorest of the poor, more than quadrupled, because we want to make sure that we reap the demographic dividend by making sure that the children of the poor is kept in school and brought to health centers. And I think that's ultimately going to be the key, to make sure that each and every Filipino become productive participants in our economy.
Well, that was the Philippines Finance Minister, Cesar Purisima, talking to me about the outlook for the fast-growing economy, also talking about the outlook for the dollar if the United States does default on its debt, with the debt ceiling looming in exactly 2 weeks from now. The interesting thing he had to say was, well, you know, they can print their way out of the impasse at the moment because people want dollars. They really can't afford to undermine the confidence in the world's reserve currency.